Kia ora, my name is Caleb and I'm here at one of my most favorite places to come, Maunga Keke, otherwise known as One Tree Hill. I'm here with you to pick up the story of Easter. We've heard yesterday that the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus is taken away. He's taken in the middle of the night and he's arrested by the Roman authorities. And he's taken, and we know that he's beaten, he is bruised, and he is bloodied. And he is forced to carry a cross up Calvary to die. It doesn't sound so good, does it? But strangely, it was used for good by God. Good Friday shows us that Jesus' pain was for a purpose. And that purpose, my friends, was you and I. Okay, confession time. I am a serial scroller on my phone. Serial scroller. Yep, I tend to scroll only up and down, never left and right. And I promise you, I never scroll on the toilet seat. I'm just kidding, I do. And what do I scroll? I scroll to learn about the news. I scroll because I want to figure out what's going on. On Instagram, I try to stay hip, although I hear it's TikTok nowadays. I don't know. I scroll to find out about my favorite sports team, what's going on in the NBA, or with my favorite team, the mighty Vodafone Warriors. And I also scroll on Instagram. Do you guys? Hashtag, if you know, you know. Hashtag link in bio. Hashtag, do people still hashtag? I don't know, call me old. But anyway, I'm addicted to scrolling. I wonder if you are as well. But I don't know about you. Whenever I scroll on my phone, I can't help but run into sad news, bad news. And when I keep scrolling, I don't know about you, but I feel so overwhelmed. There's just so much stuff going on in the world. It can be so overwhelming. So what do we do with that? What do we do with the pain and the injustice that's in the world? I mean, you don't have to look too far to find bad news, right? Any day now, World War III could happen. COVID is still here. The cost of living is so high and people are struggling. And as we know, we are so under-resourced when it comes to mental health, and yet it's such a needed thing here in our country. Guys, it doesn't take far to look to see the pain in our world. Pain touches all of us. Maybe you have had a broken relationship or friendship. Or maybe you've had a parent that's unfairly criticized you or treated you. Or maybe you've been bullied. Maybe you've even been the bully. Everywhere we look, we can see and we can feel pain. And I know when I go through hard times like this, it's easy for me to say, God, where are you? To feel like I'm alone. It's easy for me to say, God, why aren't you fixing this? God, why didn't you stop my dad from getting that head injury in that car crash? Or God, where were you when those boys were tormenting me in class, day in and day out? And God, why didn't you help me to not hurt others based on that same pain? I wonder if you can relate to anything that I've said. Well, if you can, I want to say to you, Jesus can too. So, it's Good Friday. Jesus is betrayed by one of his best friends, and the Roman authorities come to arrest him because his people told him to do so. How did we get here? You see, Jesus was going all about the country preaching and teaching about God. And Jesus was the most subscribed Netflix show in town. Everyone was hearing about him. Why was he so interesting? Because he was different. You see, the religious leaders, they were teaching a version of God that was very different to what Jesus taught. Where Jesus hung out with the outcasts, the broken, the hurt, and the lonely, the religious leaders wouldn't go near them because they were too holy. Where Jesus taught in very simple stories so that everyone could understand, the religious leaders complicated everything and made it so hard for people to follow God. In Jesus, God came close to all people, not just the supposedly holy ones or good enough ones. Jesus touched blind eyes and they saw, deaf ears and they heard. He cast out demons and he healed people from all kinds of sickness and disease. In other words, Jesus was the good news that God was with them, finally, Emmanuel in the flesh. In Matthew 27, we find that the religious leaders are challenged by what Jesus is saying. They're jealous of what he's claiming. And if it's true, if Jesus is the Son of God, then that means their whole gig is up. And so they take Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, and they needed him to give the order to have Jesus killed. So what did Jesus do? Well, Matthew's gospel tells us that Jesus remained silent to his accusers. What would he do that for? Matthew goes on to tell us that Jesus remained quiet for the entirety of the trial. So through the interrogation, Jesus remained silent against every charge that was laid against him. And guys, this is even more crazy when you consider the fact that Jesus was not guilty of anything. Not only that, but the trial that they did was a sham. They had witnesses that didn't corroborate. They had an illegal trial in the middle of the night. This was all so wrong, and yet Jesus remained silent. And what's even more crazier is that the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, he knew that Jesus was innocent and that this whole trial was a sham. And he even tried to get out of it. You see, he took Jesus and a criminal called Barabbas, who was a murderer, and he said to the people, "Which one do you want to set free?" This was a weird custom that he used to do every year. And still, the people said, "Crucify Jesus." So how unfair was this? Friggin' unfair as. When I think about the story, I actually get a little bit angry, realizing the injustice Jesus faced. To the world and everyone around him, Jesus' silence looked like guilt. For him, his silence showed that he not only stood up against them, but that he was all in no matter what. Now I know what you're thinking, but Caleb G, that was Jesus. Of course he would respond like that. Well, what if I told you that throughout history, men and women have stood up in defiance against injustice in different ways as well? Let's go to America. Rosa Parks. One day she sat on a bus. And she did this at a time where there were racial segregation laws against her people. You see, because of the color of her skin, she couldn't sit on the bus. But she did, like a boss. And because she did that, it made worldwide news and it changed the conversation in her country. In defiance to injustice, she sat on a bus. Martin Luther King, he had a dream. And his dream was that one day there would be racial harmony in his country. And this dream, well, he was killed for it, as you know. In defiance against injustice, he had a dream. What about our own shores? What about here in Aotearoa? Te Whiti o Rongomai and Tohu Kākahi, Māori prophets from Parehaka, they refused to let their land be taken by the corrupt New Zealand government. And so they were beaten, they were bruised, and they were bloodied, and they were imprisoned unjustly. In defiance to injustice, they chose to resist the greed of the powerful. And I'm reminded, even in recent years, just down the road here, in the shadow of Māngere Mountain, there they stood in defiance again against the illegal acquisition of land at Ihumātao. And in defiance to injustice, they remind us that we will not repeat the mistakes of our past. And all of these stories teach us that if you stand up to injustice, people's hearts can change, that justice can flow like a river. But it also shows us that when you stand up for justice, that it can really cost you. It can cost you your reputation, and it could even cost you your life. Now I know what you're thinking, but Caleb bro, you just named world famous, world changing kind of people. They're just built different. Yeah, I hear you, but what about the young woman that came to me from my youth group? Her friends had all turned on her, and in this incident, they blamed her for it. Caleb, she said to me, they accuse me of things that I haven't even done. And I don't want to defend myself because I don't want to add to it. Caleb, it's just not fair. And so I told her how Jesus stood silent before his accusers. But why? She said to me. Why did he do that? I don't know, I said to her. And we sat there in silence, wondering about Jesus and how he could face such hatred with so much grace. And do you want to know what happened next for her? The situation actually got worse. More pain, more injustice. But in defiance, she acted with love towards them, not treating them as they treated her. Friends, Jesus knows what it is to face injustice and to walk straight into it, no matter what. Now, does that mean that being silent is always the way we should respond? Ka ore, no. You see, Jesus, throughout the Gospels, which you should read, he growled people off, he argued with people, and he even threw some tables around, okay? What I'm not saying is to just be passive. But in this situation, Jesus' ultimate act of defiance was still to come, and it would change the world forever. I want to talk to you about the cross. Now, it's more than just a necklace, or for some cool hipster kids, an earring now, whatever floats your boat. Have you ever stopped to think, what does the cross originally mean? Well, the cross was an execution tool. The Romans used crucifixion as a tool because they knew it was one of the most humiliating and painful ways to die. Before he was sentenced, Jesus was beaten, he was mocked, he was spat on, and after he was sentenced, it got even worse. Now, I'm not going to share every gory detail, but it's worth saying that what happened to Jesus was ugly and it was evil. Before the crowds that were gathered, they stripped Jesus naked. And they used a whip on him that was designed to rip away pieces of flesh. Just to give you an idea of how bad it was, he would have a permanent limp after this. To add insult to injury, they gave him a crown. It wasn't made of gold, it was made of thorns so that he would bleed. You see, not only did they physically hurt him, but they mocked him, saying he was a king. And to add to that, they gave him a robe that covered his open wounds. And this robe was the color purple, the color of royalty. They then made Jesus carry his own cross up to Calvary. Scripture tells us that Jesus needed help carrying his cross. And so a man called Simon was pulled from the crowd and carried it for him. Now this story has so much pain, and I don't even want to think about it half the time. But do you remember earlier I said that his pain was for a purpose? Well, 700 years before Jesus did this, before he was born, there was a prophet and his name was Isaiah. And Isaiah wrote a prophecy about the Messiah that would come. And so this is what he said in Isaiah chapter 53. He was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with deepest grief. We turned our backs on him and looked the other way. He was despised and we did not care. Yet it was our weaknesses he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed. All of us like sheep have strayed away. We have left God's path to follow our own. Yet the Lord laid on him the sins of us all. He was oppressed and treated harshly, yet he never said a word. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep is silent before the shearers, he did not open his mouth. Unjustly condemned, he was led away. Jesus' pain was for a purpose, you and I. Jesus turned this Roman tool of execution, turned it around to represent our sin, our injustice, and our pain. As we finish our time together this morning, I want to ask you two questions. What injustice have you gone through, or are you going through currently? And what pain are you carrying? I want you to think about it as a cross that you are carrying. I want you to picture it right now. How does it feel? How heavy is it? And maybe this cross isn't even yours. Maybe like Simon, you're carrying someone else's pain, someone else's injustice. And this Good Friday, the picture is clear. That no matter what pain that you have gone through, no matter what injustice you have suffered, no matter what has happened, Jesus is here wanting to carry the cross for you. My friends, it's been a pleasure to share time with you. And before I leave, just remember one thing, that Friday is here, but there is much, much more to come. Bless you.